We have previously examined reports that the United States may have conducted clandestine experiments during World War II, with the infamous Philadelphia experiment allegedly cloaking a naval warship at great personal cost to those involved. Stories persist that the events aboard the USS Eldridge form the basis for yet further disturbing research on the part of the US military, a sinister scientific program known as the Montauk Project. On the afternoon of the 12th of July 2008, local police were called to the Ditch Plains Beach in Suffolk County, New York, to report that a body had been located there. Having arrived, officers parted the small crowd of onlookers to discover that the remains which had washed up with the morning tide were thankfully not those of a human being. Strangely though, they were also not of any animal that either the police or any of the assembled witnesses had ever seen before. The creature in question was roughly the same size as a large canine, but completely hairless, with a set of large incisors jutting out from below what appeared to be a beak-like nose. Whilst the corpse of this bizarre-looking entity was in the process of being recovered, word of the incident quickly spread throughout the local community. The coming days would see journalists from numerous news outlets descending upon the towns near to the beach, asking residents for their theories as to what the carcass could be. For the most part, the townsfolk believed the creature was most likely a raccoon or coyote, which had bloated and degraded having spent a long time in the water. Others suggested to the reporters that the dead animal could be some kind of bizarre hybrid, created as a result of experimentation at the nearby Plum Island Disease Centre. And in a handful of cases, those being questioned became visibly nervous and evasive, intimating that the mysterious animal had originated elsewhere. Directing the journalists to a redundant military complex situated several miles to the northeast of the beach, they simply refused to speak of the matter any further, and warned the reporters that the abandoned facility was a place of great danger, where horrific crimes had once taken place. For those journalists who placed any credence in the assertions of these nervous citizens, their short drive up along the coast would lead them to the Camp Hero State Park. Located within the boundaries of this large area of outstanding natural beauty are the remains of a US naval base, which date back to the height of the Second World War. Constructed during the early days of 1942, Camp Hero is intended to provide defences for local maritime traffic against the murderous attacks of German U-boats. In a bid to hide the base from potential enemy sympathisers, several efforts were made to disguise it as a local fishing village. This resulted in depictions of windows and doorways painted onto the large concrete bunkers, and fake chimneys added to replicate local houses and shops. Having been closed down shortly after the surrender of the Axis powers, the onset of the Cold War saw the fort reactivated and renamed the Montauk Naval Air Station. Its primary purpose shifted to radar tracking, part of a wider national early warning system to protect against incursions by Soviet nuclear bombers. The Montauk Air Station would continue to act in this capacity until the early 1980s, when the decision was made to finally close the base as part of a wider decommissioning project. The authorities, however, elected not to dismantle the 90-foot-tall radar dish that loomed over the coastline there, instead leaving it as a reference point for local shipping. With the empty buildings falling into disrepair, the Parks Authority later fenced them off completely to prevent public access and avoid potential accidents at the site. For roughly 20 years, the station's role in the wartime defense of the United States was largely forgotten, only to explode back into the public consciousness during the late 1990s. A man named Preston Nichols began to give interviews promoting a book he had written, in which he detailed a sinister and secretive history of the Naval Air Base. He alleged it had been covertly used by US intelligence agencies to try and gain superiority over foreign leaders and governments. The project, which he claimed to have been a part of, was ultimately deemed a failure by those who were running it. The facilities at Montauk quietly shut down at the same time the base was closed, hiding any evidence of the tragic loss of human life which had taken place there. At the heart of Nichols' allegations lay a covert CIA initiative that had been conducted during the dying days of World War II, in an effort to boost America's post-war prestige. Named Operation Paperclip, this project saw CIA agents working hand in hand with Army intelligence resources to find and then abduct leading Nazi engineers from mainland Europe. Faced with the prospect of a public trial and possible execution if found guilty, thousands of German scientists readily elected to work for the US government under new assumed identities. In doing so, they provided their handlers with details of the controversial and arcane experiments which their former superiors had demanded, and the means of how to continue such work. Included amongst these secretive procedures were projects aimed at achieving time travel, mind control, and transit across interdimensional pathways. Nichols claimed that a number of these scientists were posted to the Montauk Naval Air Base, with their work conducted in a series of underground levels beneath the main complex. It was here that they continued to refine drugs and techniques designed to control and suppress human will, just as their previous masters had ordered them to do during the war. This work formed part of another notorious CIA program, MKUltra, which would eventually be closed down in the 1970s when the general public came to learn of its existence. There was a widespread public outcry when it was revealed that participants in the program had died or committed suicide as a result of the substances they had been administered. Preston Nichols alleged that the limited information which had managed to find its way into the hands of the US Senate was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the full reality was much more disturbing. Use of mind-altering chemicals and psychoactive substances only formed a small part of the work which had been undertaken beneath the Montauk Air Base. The scientists there had apparently utilized other techniques, such as high-frequency radio waves and brutal physical torture, to fundamentally alter the psyche of their test subjects. They also used the same methods to eventually wipe the memories of the staff who had worked with them on the Montauk project, including the memories which had been held by Preston Nichols himself. Nichols alleged that during the latter half of the 1980s, he experienced several bizarre and unsettling encounters with people he had never met before. These individuals had approached him in the street or made contact with him at his place of work, going on to claim that he had been their boss on a secret government project. Initially dismissing their remarks as some sort of prank or possibly even mental illness, Nichols eventually became disturbed by the fact that each person appeared to be recounting the exact same set of details. They attempted to convince him that he had been the deputy director of something known as the Montauk Project, based at an air base which was situated in the New York district of the same name. Eventually, these encounters compelled Nichols to undertake a visit to the site they had described, where he was able to persuade a caretaker to allow him access. Almost immediately, as he cautiously made his way through the empty offices and abandoned hangars, Preston Nichols began to recall memories he had never known before. He experienced visions in the third person, as he and others carried out horrific experiments on young test subjects. Hurrying to where he recalled that staircases and escalators to the lower levels were located, he was stunned to find that each of them had been concreted over. Exiting the building, his gaze then rose to meet the dilapidated 40-foot wide radar dish that loomed over the base, as he recalled its shocking hidden purpose. It had been used by him and his colleagues to broadcast extremely high-frequency radio waves into the local community, before conducting inquiries into the effects. A subsequent visit to the local police station soon uncovered evidence that the events Nichols was now recalling had indeed taken place during the 1980s. One of the officers on duty there related that whenever the radar dish was seen to rotate above the base, bizarre and inexplicable incidents would go on to be reported. These included groups of people stood together for several minutes in trance-like states, before regaining consciousness, with no idea as to why they had assembled in such a way. There were also instances of mass deaths of local animals and birds, as well as residents being rushed to hospital with severe headaches and nosebleeds. Alongside this, local youths were coerced and blackmailed by CIA operatives into becoming test subjects in the underground levels of the base. They would be starved and physically beaten on the orders of the scientists, before attempts were then made to clumsily reprogram their brain patterns. This was all for the purpose of ascertaining whether it was possible to unlock psychic powers, such as the ability to project themselves to other locations, or to harm others, without having to be physically present. As time passed, Nichols produced more books on his experiences, and in doing so, only managed to undermine any semblance of credibility he had once held. Each successive publication became more fantastic than the one before, until he was eventually forced to admit that he had added fictional content to make them more appealing to readers. However, several other individuals would later come forward, also alleging they were participants in the Montauk project, who later regained their memories after having them wiped. These included James Bruce and Stuart Swerdlow, both of whom claimed to have been abducted by the military and then experimented upon at Camp Hero. They were only two of a much wider number of test subjects who were starved, drugged, and beaten in an effort to unlock powers and abilities buried deep within their psyche. The young test subjects were encouraged by their captors to try and harm one another using only the power of their minds. Efforts were also made to see if it was possible to remotely project their consciousness to other parts of the globe in order to observe the secrets of those nations, an ability otherwise known as remote viewing. Even more bewildering was the testimony of two other men, Al Bielek and Duncan Cameron, both of whom claimed to have been crew members aboard the infamous USS Eldridge. The pair described how, as the situation spiraled out of control inside the warship during the events of the Philadelphia experiment, they had run up to the deck. They had surmised that the only way they would survive the fate experienced by their comrades would be to jump clear of the hull, only to then wake up 40 years in the future, several hundred miles away inside a hangar at the Montauk facility, where scientists were experimenting on portal technology. Agreeing to join the project, the two men worked at the base for several years, helping scientists in trying to harness wormholes to travel through space and time. In one instance, they allegedly survived a tragic and brutal accident that killed many of their colleagues, when something had emerged from one of the portals and gone on a killing spree. They stated that this had been the catalyst which persuaded the government to close down a hidden reactor beneath the site, concreting over all the entrances that led down to the lower levels. Just as with the other test subjects, their memories were then wiped, but restored naturally over time. In the years since the first stories of the Montauk project emerged, many people have managed to sneak into the abandoned airbase in search of answers. Geological surveys have produced evidence of tunnels and chambers hidden beneath the derelict buildings on the site, as well as what appear to be sealed-up stairwells. Perhaps of note is that in the covenant agreed with the military, it is specifically stated that the Park Service were only granted authority over anything above the surface of the ground. The radar tower is still present, with suspicions that it was not left as a navigational aid at all, but that it was instead still used in secretive experiments. The location of the base was perfect for the amplification of high-frequency signals generated by other hidden facilities located around the wider United States. Some locals even allege that they have seen the dish rotating since the base was shut down, and that people in the vicinity continue to suffer headaches and nausea as a result. It is impossible to deny that the many haunting and fantastic accounts provided by those who allege they were involved in the project test the limits of believability. And if the story sounds like the plot of the TV series Stranger Things, that's because it is. The writers were directly inspired by the events which were alleged to have taken place there, and even named the show Montauk when pitching it to various streaming services. Despite the outlandish nature of such claims, however, it is equally possible that as more and more of America's historic military secrets continue to be uncovered, some confirmation of their accounts may still be forthcoming. Their stories have already left an indelible mark upon our society in numerous ways, referenced in various works and pop culture. In this way, the Montauk Project and the other alleged CIA programs associated with it will never fully fade away from the public consciousness. In January of 1931, the inhabitants of a small settlement on the shores of Lake Anjakuni vanished under mysterious circumstances. There was little information available to the Mounties who were dispatched to investigate, but it was the testimony of a local trapper that troubled them most. He stated that he had witnessed blue lights hovering in the sky about a week before the disappearance. In the closing weeks of 1970, the badly burned remains of a female victim were discovered lying on the slopes of Mount Ulriken in Norway. Not only was the manner in which she died horrifying, but the extent to which her alleged attackers went to ensure that she could not be recognised was utterly bewildering. Her true identity has continued to elude the authorities right up until this very day. Make sure you join us this Wednesday on the Bedtime Stories podcast for our exclusive episode Ipsum Arcanum, featuring the stories of the village that vanished and the Isdal woman, available wherever you get your podcasts.